The crack of my skull against the marble wasn't the part that hurt most. What hurt was knowing my father would rather see me broken on the floor than let me own what I had built. People talk about trauma as if it comes in waves, but for me, it came in a single echo that wouldn't die, under chandeliers, in front of 280 witnesses. I remember the silence that followed more than the sound itself. I remember how the phones didn't drop, how not a single person stepped between us. For 30 years, I had been the quiet daughter, the one who fixed things, the one who never spoke out of turn. But that night, I said 2 words. It's mine. And those words cracked my life open like a fault line. Before that night, I lived in the margins of the Hart family story. I'm Evelyn Reyes now, but back then, I was Evelyn Hart, the daughter who built things no one saw. My sister Claire was the chosen one. My father, Gregory, had built his whole identity around her. The golden girl. The future of his name. The proof that his bloodline produced perfection. I was background noise. The scaffolding holding up their illusions. When I bought the ruined house on Maple Street, no one came to see it. They said it was a waste, a pile of rot. But I saw something different. I saw bones strong enough to outlast lies. 3 years of rebuilding. Alone, broke, half frozen, with splinters buried in my hands. Every nail I drove in that house was a way of saying I exist. And for a time, that was enough. Until Claire's wedding. I knew my father would make a spectacle. He always did. But I didn't think he'd weaponize my home. The ballroom was thick with perfume and performance. And when he raised that champagne flute, I already smelled the bourbon. From her generous sister, he said, a gift of love. The restored home on Maple Street. The applause was thunderous. My pulse stopped. That was the trap. A public announcement. A lie too grand to deny without destroying the illusion. He counted on my silence, on my training, but I walked forward, every step slicing through the applause, and said what I had never been allowed to say. That's a lie. He shoved me so hard my body became weightless. For a fraction of a second, I wasn't in pain. I was free. Then the marble wall met the back of my skull, and the world turned into ringing glass. Phones captured it. One of them streamed it live. When I woke up in the hospital, the clip had millions of views. My father's empire, his company, his reputation, was already unraveling. But all I felt was a hollow, terrified calm, because for the first time, the whole world saw what I had seen my entire life. His mask breaking. The police came before sunrise. I told them the truth. He attacked me in front of hundreds of people. They said the evidence was overwhelming. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It felt like the tears had been used up years before, swallowed every time I was told to be quiet. Every time Claire's laughter filled the space where I should have existed. When the detective asked if I wanted to press charges, I thought about the smell of bourbon, about the way his hand had felt on my shoulder, about the word he'd always used when I said no. Selfish. I said yes. Absolutely. Later that morning, I met with Jacob, the only person who'd ever treated my work like it mattered. He was a restoration contractor, older, steady. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, we're going to build a wall so high he can't touch you again. He called his lawyer friend, Maravela, who specialized in property and assault cases. She took one look at the documents, deeds, receipts, tax records, and said, this house is yours, Evelyn, ironclad. She filed restraining orders and injunctions before I could even catch my breath. For the first time, the law was on my side, not his. My mother called that afternoon. Her voice cracked through tears. Evelyn, please. What are you doing? He's your father. You're destroying this family. I let her words wash over me like acid. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She didn't ask if I was safe. She just wanted the story restored. The family myth polished back to a shine. He destroyed it, I said. But she was already crying harder, pleading for me to stop. I recorded the call, because Mara told me to. It's not guilt, she said later. Playing it back? It's manipulation. Save it. Then came Claire's message. My wedding is ruined. Ethan's parents are furious. This is your fault. My hands shook, not from anger, but from something colder. I replied with one sentence. It's not my fault you married into a lie. I hit send. By that evening, Mara had released a statement to the press. It was short. Surgical. Mrs. Reyes is recovering from injuries sustained in a public assault at the Maplewood Grand. She is cooperating fully with authorities. The property at 52 Maple Street remains her legal residence. The story went viral again. Overnight, my father's company stock plummeted. Sponsors pulled out. The man who had always controlled the narrative had lost it entirely. And as I sat in my small hospital room, my head throbbing, I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe before. Survival isn't quiet. Sometimes it screams, sometimes it bleeds under chandeliers, but it lives. When I left the hospital, the morning air felt heavier, colder, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The news vans were parked in a neat row outside, engines humming, cameras trained on the exit. I could have gone through the back, but I didn't. I walked straight out the front door, head bandaged, spine straight. They shouted my name, called out questions about forgiveness, revenge, family. I didn't answer. The cameras didn't deserve words yet. My silence, for once, belonged to me. Jacob was waiting by the curb in his old gray truck. He'd traded his work clothes for a suit, the same one he wore to city council meetings when he fought for preservation grants. When he opened the passenger door, I hesitated. Are you sure about this? I asked. Evelyn, he said quietly. You've been sure for years. You just couldn't say it out loud. We drove through the streets of Arbor Hill, past half-built condos my father's company had erected, the hollow skeletons of his empire. The radio was silent, but I could feel the noise of the world outside. Hashtags, outrage, the video playing in endless loops. When we reached my house, 52 Maple Street, I half expected to find the locks broken again. But the door stood firm, the brass handle catching the sunlight. I unlocked it with a trembling hand. Inside, everything was still. The scent of sawdust and varnish lingered in the air. The smell of work, of ownership. I could almost hear my own voice echoing in the empty rooms. It's mine. Mara met us there. She moved through the rooms like a storm in heels, her clipboard tucked under one arm, her expression made of steel. The restraining orders are filed, she said. They can't come near you or this property. The county recorder has been notified. Your deed is untouchable. She looked up from her notes, eyes sharp. Now we go on the offensive. Every text, every voicemail, every piece of evidence that shows they tried to take this from you. We build the timeline. I handed her my phone. Start with this. She listened to my mother's voicemail, her face unreadable. Classic guilt strategy, she said. Then she played Claire's message. You ruined my wedding. Perfect. That's coercion. She's building a case against herself. I wanted to feel satisfaction, but what I felt was grief. The kind that sinks deep, like rot in wood. That afternoon, Mara organized a meeting with the Summit Grand Hotel manager. He looked terrified, his perfect corporate mask cracking as she spoke. The footage, she demanded. All of it. Within an hour, she had a copy of the master recording from the ballroom's security system. 4 angles. Crystal clear audio. When I saw the moment he shoved me, the way my body hit the wall and the crowd gasped. I didn't see myself as a victim. I saw the truth, stripped of excuses. The camera didn't blink, didn't twist the story. It was what it was. A man's rage made visible. That evening, Mara sent the footage to the police and to the press. She called it transparency. My father called it betrayal. His lawyers started calling every hour, issuing vague statements about family misunderstandings. But the story had already taken on a life of its own. By midnight, the internet had renamed it the Maple Street Incident. Every outlet had the same headline: CEO assaults daughter during live-streamed wedding speech. The next morning, Gregory Hart was arrested outside his office. I saw the footage later. Him in handcuffs, face pale, yelling about defamation and loyalty. The man who had built entire neighborhoods now couldn't even walk through a crowd without them parting out of disgust. His empire began collapsing the same way houses do when you remove the load-bearing wall. The sponsors fled. The investors froze assets. The city council suspended his contracts. Claire went silent for a week. Then the leaks started. Texts between her and a bridesmaid. "Dad's got this," one said. "He'll announce it at the wedding. She can't say no in front of everyone." The screenshot hit the internet like a match dropped in gasoline. Whatever sympathy she had evaporated, the golden daughter was now a co-conspirator in theft and humiliation. I thought I'd feel triumph watching their downfall. Instead, I felt hollow. Vindication wasn't warm. It was cold and clinical, like disinfectant after an infection's been cut open. When Mara showed me the trending tags, "Justice for Evelyn, the architect's daughter," I barely recognized the woman they were talking about. Jacob stopped by that night. We sat on my porch, the air thick with the smell of pine and sawdust. "You know what, I think," he said quietly. "You didn't just break a man, Evelyn. You broke a system. People are seeing it now." I didn't reply. I just looked at my hands. The same hands that had built this house from ruin. For years, I had used them to make things solid. Now, somehow, they'd torn down something rotten instead. Inside, the lights I'd wired myself glowed warm against the windows. My house stood strong, its walls humming with a quiet defiance. I knew this wasn't over. Not legally, not emotionally, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I'd learned that some foundations only reveal their strength when everything built on top of them has finally fallen away. The next morning, the air around the courthouse felt like the pause before a storm. I could see my father standing by the entrance, his once impeccable suit wrinkled, a hollow shadow of the man who'd once commanded entire boardrooms. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted his name, but this time his smile didn't work. He'd spent his life manufacturing charm, selling the illusion of control, but under those lenses, stripped of applause, he just looked small. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. The walls smelled of varnished wood and judgment. I sat at the prosecution's table beside the assistant district attorney, while Mara sat behind me, her files lined up like weapons. Jacob was in the second row, his broad shoulders still, his gaze fixed on me. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't need to. I could feel him, the weight of his presence, the same suffocating force that had once filled every room of my childhood. But this time, it had no power. When the judge entered, the silence was absolute. Then the DA pressed play. The screen descended from the ceiling like a guillotine. And there it was. The wedding, the chandeliers, the applause. My father's voice echoed through the speakers. A gift from her generous sister. The room held its breath as I appeared on screen, walking forward, calm, certain. That's a lie. Even through the speakers, my voice sounded alien, stronger than I remembered. Then came the moment, the shove, the impact, the sickening crack. The sound filled the courtroom like a gunshot. A woman in the jury box flinched so hard she dropped her pen. A man in the back cursed under his breath. My father's lawyers shifted uncomfortably, but there was nothing they could say. The truth was playing in high definition. Every word, every sound, every drop of blood on the marble was undeniable. The DA paused the video. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly, "this is what happens when silence meets resistance." Gregory's defense was pathetic. His lawyer, a man with an expensive haircut and a hollow soul, tried to frame it as a family misunderstanding. He used words like emotional moment, lapse in judgment, private tragedy. He even dared to say my name with pity. "Miss Reyes simply misunderstood her father's intentions," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He was trying to embrace her, not harm her. The jury's eyes narrowed. They'd seen the video. They'd heard the crack. There was no embrace in that movement. There was domination, rage, possession, the same ingredients that had ruled our family for decades. When the DA called the witnesses, they came like dominoes. The hotel manager confirmed the authenticity of the video. The young man who filmed it live told them he'd watched in disbelief as my father's hand clamped on my shoulder. The doctor testified about the concussion, the staples in my scalp, the contusions along my spine. Then Mara took the stand. She was ice in human form. "This was not a misunderstanding," she said. This was the culmination of months of coercion and manipulation intended to deprive my client of her property and her autonomy. She showed the jury the deed, the invoices, the texts from Claire's bridesmaid. Each piece of paper was another nail in the coffin of my father's defense. When my mother took the stand, her performance cracked. She tried to cry. She tried to plead that family loyalty should come before law. But her voice trembled on the word family, and for the first time, everyone in that room could see the truth. Loyalty, in our house, had always been a leash. When she looked at me, her eyes filled with something that wasn't love or regret. It was fear. The verdict came after only 45 minutes. Guilty. The word hung in the air like a verdict on my entire past. My mother gasped. A small, animal sound. My father just stared at the floor, shoulders caved inward, a man finally crushed by the weight of his own making. The judge read the sentence: prison time, plus a lifetime restraining order. He could never come within 500 feet of me or my property. It wasn't just a judgment. It was the physical boundary I'd been trying to build all my life. Outside, the cameras waited again. Reporters shouted my name, asking how it felt to see my father convicted. I didn't answer. I just looked straight ahead, at the sky beyond the courthouse steps. For the first time, the air felt clean. My silence wasn't submission anymore. It was peace. That night, I sat on my porch with Jacob. The lights from the house glowed behind us, the same warm gold I'd chosen years ago when I rebuilt it. The wind rustled the trees along Maple Street. "It's over," he said. I shook my head. "No, it's beginning." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from understanding rather than comfort. "Then build something from it." And I did. Months passed, and the noise of the trial faded into something distant, like the hum of a storm that had already broken and passed. The headlines stopped mentioning my name, the hashtags cooled, and the city turned its attention to newer scandals. But my world didn't return to silence. It evolved. I had no interest in fame, but people kept finding me. Strangers left letters in my mailbox, some handwritten, others printed. They all said the same thing in different words. "Thank you for saying no." One message stayed with me. It came from a woman in her 50s who had left her own abusive family decades earlier. "They called me ungrateful," she wrote, "because I refused to fund their comfort anymore. I thought I was the only one who walked away. You showed me I wasn't." I read it 3 times. The words didn't heal me. They built something sturdier than healing. They built understanding. My house, my fortress, became a place for others who needed to rebuild. It started with Jacob's suggestion. "Let's make this something more," he said one evening, spreading blueprints across my kitchen island. "A workshop, maybe, a place where people learn how to fix what's broken, with their hands first. Then the rest of them." I agreed, not because I wanted to teach, but because I understood repair. We called it the Maple Restoration Project. On Saturdays, the house filled with people, students, retirees, women who'd survived things they couldn't yet name. I taught them how to mend wood, how to read the lines of old plaster, how to tell when a structure still had good bones. They learned quickly that restoring a house wasn't about covering damage. It was about acknowledging it, reinforcing it. Every board you sanded, every nail you placed, was a conversation between ruin and endurance. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the stained glass window on the staircase, the one I had rebuilt piece by piece after finding it shattered, I caught myself watching a young woman smoothing varnish over a chair leg. She was humming softly, her movements careful but strong. It reminded me of myself years ago, the girl who had worked until her hands bled, trying to prove her worth to people who would never see it. But now, the proof was alive, breathing, multiplying. The girl who used to whisper family first under her breath had become a woman, teaching others that self first isn't selfish, it's survival. My mother wrote once more after the sentencing. The letter arrived on thick cream stationery, her cursive precise, elegant, and cold. She wrote of regret for the situation, hope for reconciliation, and deep sadness for the division in our family. Not once did she use the words, "I'm sorry." Not once did she say he was wrong. I read it in silence, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer in my workshop. The one labeled scrap. It wasn't rage that made me put it there. It was closure. Claire disappeared. Last I heard, she'd moved back east, changed her last name, and was trying to start over. I didn't feel hatred anymore, only a quiet pity. I knew what it meant to live inside someone else's story, to perform a part written for you. But I had escaped the script, and that was something she might never learn to do. Gregory's empire collapsed completely. The board voted him out. His company was liquidated. His accounts seized. His home sold. When I saw the listing online one day, a sprawling mansion with an asking price slashed in half, I didn't feel satisfaction, just distance. Once upon a time, that house had been my prison. Now it was someone else's investment. Jacob stayed. Sometimes we didn't talk for hours, just worked side by side, sanding, cutting, measuring, the rhythm of tools replacing the rhythm of words. He never asked about my family. He never asked how I was healing. He knew healing wasn't something that happened once. It was maintenance, checking for cracks, reinforcing the frame, applying new coats of strength when the old ones wore thin. One evening, as the sun bled orange through the glass, I stood in my living room surrounded by the faint scent of wood and lemon oil. The house was alive. Every wall, every joint, carried my fingerprint. It had outlasted their cruelty. It had outlasted their names. I walked to the front porch, carrying a small brass plaque I'd ordered months before. With steady hands, I drilled it into the beam I'd set with my own strength. The sound of the drill was steady, almost musical. When I stepped back, the plaque gleamed in the fading light. It wasn't pride I felt. It was peace. The kind that comes when you know you've built something no one can take from you again. I turned toward the quiet street, the porch lights glowing soft behind me, and breathed in the scent of the pines. My voice came out steady, almost a whisper. No one writes my story anymore. Then I smiled, small, certain, and stepped back inside my house, where the light through the stained glass spilled in colors of ruby, amber, and gold. The colors of survival, the colors of vengeance turned into freedom. Thank you for watching. If Evelyn's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Vengeance Within for more powerful stories of survival, justice, and rebirth.